It is the morning of day 10 of the Commonwealth versus Karen Read. The Commonwealth has accused Karen Read of striking her boyfriend, Boston police officer John O'Keefe, with her car after a night of drinking and leaving him in the snow to die. The defense is saying, as they said in their opening statement, that Karen Read was framed and this is all a cover-up. At the end of trial day 10, now into week 3 of the Commonwealth versus Karen Read, we started the morning session with Brian Albert, the homeowner at 34 Fairview and former Boston police officer, now retired, on the stand for cross-examination. And we ended the morning with Brian Albert on the stand, subject to cross-examination. There was much conversation about how to get in and out of the basement. We actually saw some new video for the first time of where the basement, they called it the bulkhead doors or like the cellar doors, where the basement exited out into the backyard near the side fence. That side fence of the yard exits out closer to the flagpole, which is nearer to where the victim was found in the morning, Officer John O'Keefe at 34 Fairview. We also learned that there was a preservation order for evidence issued on September 23rd, and that notice went out from the DA's office on September 23rd or 24th to the witness, Brian Albert, to not destroy, get rid of, or otherwise do away with, alter, or change your phone, that the phone is subject to litigation. On the stand, Brian Albert said that his phone was upgraded on September 22nd, and his memory as to it being on September 22nd was fuzzy. It was around September 22nd, but he was very sure it was not the 23rd or 24th after the preservation notice. And then it came up that both he and Brian Higgins got rid of their phones, and that there was testimony at the grand jury that there had been some discussion about them getting rid of their phones, or at least about Brian Albert getting rid of his phone. He didn't remember if Brian Higgins said to him, "I'm going to get rid of my phone." But it seems that Brian Albert's and Brian Higgins's phones are both gone. At least the phones that they had at the time that Officer O'Keefe was found in the lawn at 34 Fairview in the snow. We also learned that there were quite a lot of phone calls going back and forth, which in and of itself doesn't surprise me the morning of January 29th. What does surprise me is the phone calls that were answered but not answered. A 22-second call from Brian Higgins to Brian Albert that Brian Albert didn't answer, his wife didn't answer, the dog Chloe didn't answer, but was a 22-second call. When we finally get into the forensic evidence of this case, and of course, we're not going to have Celebrite extractions from Brian Higgins' phone or Brian Albert's phone because those phones are gone. These cell records will be very interesting to get into, won't they? Because it's not the phone calls that were answered. It's not the phone calls that were admitted to that are the most interesting. It's those early morning phone calls that nobody seems to know how they got picked up. Isn't that odd? In addition to the fact that Brian Albert rehomed his dog, rehomed his cell phone, sold his home, retired. And though 30 years in, I understand retiring, but we also know that he has retained an attorney, it seems, in connection with the federal investigation. There's a lot going on, and also an interesting time to choose to retire. Though he did say he possibly could have butt dialed Brian Higgins while engaged in, sex with his wife at 2:00 in the morning after he had flown to New York and gone to a funeral and driven back from New York and then gone to the hillside and then gone to the waterfall and then gone back to his house that was full of people because they were having a party. And yet after 2 a.m., they were like, you know what? Let's do it. I have a lot of questions. At the end of day 10, Monday, May 13th of the Commonwealth versus Karen Read, we have gotten through most of the day of cross-examination of Brian Albert. Then we got into the testimony fairly briefly, all other things considered, of Brian Albert Jr., and then into the direct and cross-examination of Caitlin Albert. At the very end of the day, the attorneys are arguing over what impeachment or what photos can Caitlin Albert be shown to establish her relationship with Katie McLaughlin. When asked about Katie McLaughlin on the stand, she said, "We run in the same circles. We have mutual friends." So she's a friend of a mutual friend. We don't hang out one-on-one together, but she's a friend of a mutual friend. Different than Katie McLaughlin saying, "I went to high school with somebody by that name." And then, of course, it became more clear that that was inaccurate, that they were on the same track team. We've heard the defense say in court that they've spent time together, that they've spent time together in a hot tub in Maine, that they were at a baby shower together as recent as 2021, which is different than Katie McLaughlin saying, "We haven't seen each other in 3-ish years." Well, a baby shower in 2021 is not 3 years past from when the incident happened. Now, could that be a misunderstanding between haven't seen her in 3 years from when the incident happened in January 2022 to when she's on the stand now in 2024? Could that be a misunderstanding? I don't know. Maybe it could if she didn't understand what they were asking. But the defense is arguing to bring that in and that they want to impeach the statements of Caitlin Albert with those photos or use it to show inconsistent testimony with Katie McLaughlin. But Katie McLaughlin would need to be impeached with some of that, and that would need to come in with that witness. The problem that the prosecutor brought up, and this is one of the few times I've agreed with Lally, and the problem that the judge is going to bring up, is there isn't a lot of foundation to show the time of those photos because the defense is getting them from social media. And this is a problem with whether or not it will go to the witness to look at them to refresh her recollection, or whether the jury will see those photos and they'll be in evidence. I still think there are some foundational issues because you don't have the metadata, you don't have who took the photos, you don't have the date the photos were taken, you have the date they were posted on social media. Those aren't necessarily the same thing. We know that foundation in courts is becoming something that is more and more important as photo manipulation has gotten higher. Do I think these are manipulated photos? I don't think there's any reason for them to be, especially when they come out of like a high school yearbook. But how can the judge be sure that the foundation is there? But if those photos are shown to Caitlin Albert and she's like, "Oh yeah, I remember that. These photos are at so-and-so's baby shower. That was this day, or that was around this time because she had the baby around this time," then that's going to make it easier. But it needs to be a conversation with the witness first, and that might be voir dired on first and asking the witness about those photos. But foundation is something that is necessary, and grabbing the metadata off of social media doesn't necessarily help unless it gets to the underlying metadata of when the photo was taken. And this is going to go back and forth to how those photos get used, if the jury ever sees them or not, or if the witnesses just see them. We'll see what happens tomorrow. But just because something exists doesn't mean it comes in. And foundation is going to be very, very necessary when we're talking about photos that are pulled off of social media. Though others can come in later. We might get into that during the defense's case in chief. They can bring more people in and ask those questions and show it that way. "Hey, did you go to this baby shower? Hey, was this baby shower yours?" The defense can find other people to come in. So we will see what happens with that in the morning, starting day 11. For deep dives into the stories that I covered here, you can find them on my YouTube channel at The Emily D. Baker and The Emily Show podcast. I stream every Tuesday and Thursday. The podcast goes live on Wednesdays. And if you want to stay in the loop with everything I'm doing, receive the fastest notifications out there, and get more Law Nerd community, join me at lawnerdapp.com, our free app for iOS and Android.